In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the water pump and timing belt kit on your Honda Pilot. Let's get started. Pushing on the tabs, we're going to remove the cover from the bottom of the splash shield. Reaching up inside, you're going to find a little screw for the bottom of the radiator. We're going to open that and we're going to start to drain the radiator fluid. Before draining your coolant, be sure to have a drain bucket under you. To drain the radiator faster, we're going to open the top cap. Be sure that the system is cold when you do this. If the system's hot, it will be pressurized and it can come up and spray you. Using a 10mm socket, loosen the terminals on the battery. Remove the negative first, pop it off to the side, remove the positive, loosen the wing nuts, then remove the poles, and pull the bracket back as I pull the battery out, and remove the battery from the car. Remove the engine cover, remove the coolant reservoir. We're going to pull straight up out of the bracket. Pull the line out of the plastic stay. And we're going to move it over to the other side out of the way. Using a 14mm socket, we're going to put tension on the auto tensioner, loosen the belt, and pull it off. Let the tensioner return. And then continue to remove the belt. Using a 19mm socket, remove the 5 lug nuts. Remove the wheel. Remove the 10mm bolt at the corner of the bumper. This bolt should come out. There's a metal bracket on top of that it screws into, and that metal bracket is spinning with the bolt inside of it, and it ripped our front fender liner apart. There'll be one more bolt. Our shield is broken right here, so we don't necessarily have to remove it. And that bracket is spinning as well. Remove these 2 bolts, and then go to the other side and do the same thing. We're going to remove the 3 clips on the front of the cover. Pull the cover down. And remove it from the vehicle. Remove the clips out of the front of the inner fender liner. There's going to be one more up top. Then we're going to pull the inner fender liner back behind the brake rotor, and that's going to give us plenty of room. Using a 14mm, we're going to remove the bolt out of the middle of the tensioner. Unscrew the bolt. You won't be able to get it out yet. Just pull it out as far as it can go. Using a 12mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt on the bottom of the tensioner. Remove the bottom bolt. Remove the pulley and the tensioner. Using a 12mm socket, remove the bolt on the back of the power steering pump. There's one more bolt for the power steering pump on the bottom. We're going to lift the power steering reservoir straight up out of its bracket. Pull it slightly up to the side. We're going to pull this power steering pump up and out of the way. Just like that. Using a pair of pliers, we're going to squeeze the back of the plastic clip and pull it out of the cover. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to remove the bolts out of the top cover. There's one more right next to the alternator. And remove the cover. Remove the 10mm bolts for the rear timing cover. Remove the wire harness out of the plastic stay of the rear timing cover. And then remove the rear cover. We're going to use a little bit of heat on the crank bolt. This crank bolt should have a bit of thread locker on it, so we're going to heat it up and try and loosen that before we try to remove it. This is a special tool designed for the Honda crankshafts. You do not need it, but it's nice to have. Using the holder and a 19mm socket, we're going to break the crank bolt free. Once I crack the bolt free, we can remove it. Wiggle the crank pulley back and forth. As you're wiggling, be pulling out off of the shaft and remove the crank pulley. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to remove the bolts out of the lower cover. Remove the cover. Remove the plate off of the crankshaft. On this nub right here, there's going to be an arrow. This is going to be our timing mark. You want to make sure you can see this. Take a clean rag and clean back here if you can't. Now you can see that nice arrow. Using a marker or some nail polish, I'm just going to color right on that arrow just to make it stand out a bit. I'm also going to put one right on the timing mark on the crankshaft cog. There's going to be one tooth with a little dimple, and that's going to be the one that you'll mark. I'm going to reinstall the crank bolt. With our crank bolt installed, we're going to now line our timing marks up. Only turn the crankshaft clockwise. You do not want to go counterclockwise. We're going to go around in a circle in the clockwise direction until our white paint mark lines up with that arrow on the top. Once you have your marks lined up, go ahead and remove your ratchet, and then we'll go up top and make sure our cams are lined up as well. If the cams up top are not lined up where they should be, we'll come back down here and turn this 360 degrees and then recheck up top. With the bottom mark lined up on the paint mark, we're going to come up top and check that our cams are lined up. There's this arrow on number 1. And that's going to line up in this top groove. And you're going to go to the back and do the same thing. Make sure that the white mark is lined up with the mark on the back. Using a jack with a piece of wood, we're going to push up on the oil pan and lift the engine. Put a slight amount of upward pressure onto the engine, and then we'll start to remove the engine mount. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt for the harness stay on top of the engine mount. Using a 14mm socket, we're going to remove the 2 bolts from the engine mount. Remove the 2 bolts. Using a 1/4-inch ratchet with a 14mm socket, you're going to get the bottom bolt for the engine mount. It is a very tight fit. And once you have it broken free, you should be able to spin it out by hand. I'm just using the tip of my finger on the shoulder of the bolt and moving in a circular motion. Unthread the bolt and pull it out a bit. We're going to go after the top bolt on the motor mount. Spin the bolt all the way out and remove it. That's the top one, it's the longest one. Remove the bottom bolt out of the motor mount. That was the bottom middle bolt. Go up top and remove the motor mount. Using one of the poles for a battery tie down or an extra bolt, we're going to thread it through here, and this is going to hold the tensioner. Get the bolt started in the bracket, and we're going to thread this down until the bolt makes contact with the back of the tensioner. Once the bolt makes contact with the tensioner, I'm going to screw this in just a quarter to a half a turn more. You really don't want to put a lot of pressure on this bolt. And that's all I'm going to do. You don't want to bend the bolt that's in here. Using a 14mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt for the idler pulley. Remove the bolt and the pulley, and then remove the belt. Remove the belt, starting on the right side, and then moving your way over to the left. Using a 14mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt out of the tensioner pulley. Remove the bolt and remove the tensioner pulley. We're going to unthread this top bolt that we installed. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to remove the two bolts for the tensioner. You're going to want to go back and forth on these, get them both cracked loose, and then start to unthread them. Remove the bolt and the tensioner. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to remove the bolts around the water pump. I'm going to go around and crack all of them free and then start to remove them. Be sure you have a bucket under you when you're doing this. Even if you just drain the radiator, there still can be some fluid left in here. Just don't want it dripping on you. The only two bolts I have left are on each far side, and I'm going to loosen these, but not fully remove them. And once they're loosened, I'm going to move out of the way on the bottom of the vehicle, put my drip tray down, and then we're going to separate the front of the water pump off of the motor. You may need to use a flat blade screwdriver to help you break the tension. We're going to crack this open and let this drain. I'm going to fully remove the two bolts on the side. And fully remove the water pump. Remove the water pump. Using a fine abrasive, we're going to go around and clean the surface of where the water pump seal is going to sit. We don't want to take any material off, we just want to remove anything that could make the sealing surface not perfectly flat. Using a clean rag with some parts cleaner, I'm going to go around and then wipe the surface down. Get it nice and shiny around the whole thing. Once you wipe it, if you see any parts that need a little extra attention, go ahead and go back, touch them up just a little bit more, and then wipe it one more time. And then we'll be ready to install our pump. Install the gasket onto the water pump. Install the water pump onto the vehicle. There's 2 alignment pins on the back that will line it up for you. Then go around starting all of the bolts. With all the bolts hand tight, we're going to go and snug them down. Don't make them tight yet, just get them to the case. Torque the water pump bolts to 9 foot-pounds. If you can't fit a torque wrench in here, do the best you can. Install the new tensioner. Get the bolts started. Install the tensioner pulley. Be sure that you have the collar installed from the old one into the new one. Install it onto the water pump and get the bolt started. Once you have the bolt started, get it finger tight. Using a 14mm socket, we're going to tighten the adjuster pulley bolt to 18 foot-pounds. Tighten the tensioner bolts to 9 foot-pounds. Make sure you leave the pin in for now. We're going to install the idler pulley. We're going to reuse the old bolt, and we're going to clean off the threads, and then we're going to apply some new blue thread locker to it, just like that. Install it into the pulley, and the shouldered side will go towards the car. And we'll snug it down by hand. Included with this kit is a shim and an instruction packet. This instruction packet will have VIN dates listed for your vehicle. If your VIN falls within there, you will need to install this shim under this pulley to stop a squeaking noise. On one side it will be stamped with out. The other side you will not see it as well. Make sure the out is facing towards you and put it under the pulley if needed. In our case, we do not need to shim it, so we'll just install the bolt and the pulley. Torque the idler pulley to 33 foot-pounds. Install the timing belt onto the vehicle. We're going to start on our bottom cog. It's going to be the crank. We're going to slip the belt onto there. Make sure it's nice and tight, sitting perfectly. Come up over the idler. You want this to be nice and taut. And we're going to pull it up and over to our first cam. This right here is a little too loose. We're going to try and get one or two more teeth out of that belt onto the cam gear. You may have to work down below and up top during this. While you're doing this, keep an eye on your timing marks, making sure they're staying true. This one moved back slightly, so we're going to pull it back to where it's lined up. Right there. I'm going to go back down below. Pull it around the water pump. Then it's going to go up and over the next cam gear. Once I have the belt nice and taut on these first two pulleys, then we can pull it over our adjuster tensioner. Once we're installed, you want to make sure this was nice and tight. I just watched this cam move backwards. I'm going to double check these marks and then recheck my tension. We're going to double check that all of our cam gear marks are lined up on top. This one is. It's lined up perfectly with this mark in the back. We'll take a look at the back one. And that one's perfectly lined up as well. So now we'll go check the mark on the crank. Now we're on the bottom, looking at our timing marks. This arrow right here should line up with this arrow right here. And they are. So now we can come up to our tensioner. We're going to pull this pin. Using a pair of pliers, I'm going to remove the pin out of the tensioner. Just like that. Check the belt tightness. And then we're going to go around and triple check our timing marks. Our bottom one is still lined up. So we'll go up top and check our two top ones. Make sure they haven't moved. And double check the front. Make sure everything's still perfectly lined up, which it is. We're going to install the engine mount bracket plate. Before we do this, we're going to install the two long bolts in the top two holes and the short bolt on the bottom, and then install it into the vehicle. Once you have the mount lined up, go around and get all the bolts started by hand. This top right bolt is the hardest. Be very patient. Now we'll go around and snug down all the bolts. We're going to snug the mount bolts down and then torque them to 33 foot-pounds. If you can't get a torque wrench in here, do the best you can. We're going to install the top bolts into our engine mount bracket. You may need to go up or down on your jack to line up the bolt holes. In our case, we had to go down just a tad, and then the bolts were able to thread right in. On this back one, I'm just pulling on the rubber slightly on this back mount to help line it up just a little bit better. Once you have these started by hand, go ahead and snug them down. You want to make sure your bolts are lined up before you start using a ratchet, since we're putting a steel bolt into an aluminum bracket. The aluminum threads will strip really easy. Torque the top engine mount bolts to 32 foot-pounds. We're going to remove the jack out from under the vehicle. Using a 19mm socket, we're going to remove the crank bolt. Install the plate. Do this with the curve pointed out. Install the lower cover into the vehicle. Go around and get the bolts started. Go around and snug down all of the bolts. Using a rag and some brake parts cleaner, we're going to clean the crank bolt. We're going to pull the washer down and get in there as well. Once you've done that, we're going to add engine oil in between the washer and the head of the bolt. Use clean new engine oil. Put it over. And then also on the top of the washer. Install the crankshaft pulley. Set it into the keyway. And wiggle it into place. Then install the oiled bolt. Tighten it by hand. Using a crank pulley holder, we're going to hold the crank. We're going to torque our crank bolt to 48 foot-pounds. And then we're going to go an additional 60 degrees. You can use an angle meter if you have one. If you do not, you can mark the head of the bolt and mark a spot on the crank, and then hold the crank as you spin the bolt to that 60-degree mark. While holding the crankshaft, turn your bolt 60 degrees. Install the top front timing cover. And get the bolt started. Go around and snug down all of the bolts. And we'll do the same thing on the back cover. Install this wire harness first into this cover, and then fit it up into place. Get the bolt started. Go around and snug down all the bolts. Install the 10mm bolt through the top bracket. Snug it down. Install the harness clip onto the timing cover. Push it into place, it'll click in. Install the belt tensioner. I have the big bolt installed through the middle for the pulley. Drop it down through the top. Turn it. Then we're going to get the bolt started. Install the bolt into the bottom of the tensioner. Line up the holes and get the bolt started. Snug the bolts down. Torque this middle pulley bolt to 33 foot-pounds. Torque the bottom bolt to 16 foot-pounds. Install the power steering pump back into place. Torque the power steering pump bolts to 16 foot-pounds. I'm going to reach down and install the belt around the crank. I'm also going to put it around the AC compressor. With our belt set up, ready to go, we're going to use a 14mm socket on the top pulley. We're going to push on this, giving ourselves some space. Compress the tensioner and pull the belt over the pulley. Double check that the belt is sitting in the pulley. Go around and check them all, making sure they're sitting in the right ribs. And if it's sitting on a smooth pulley, make sure it's sitting square. Install the plastic harness stay onto the metal bracket. We're going to install the power steering reservoir back into place. I had mine tied up with a bungee cord. If you had one of those, remove that now. Pull the reservoir down and drop it into the bracket. Should feel it click into place. Grab your coolant reservoir, bring it back over, and drop it into the bracket. And install the line into the plastic stay. Install the battery. Hook the poles into the hooks at the bottom of the tray. And tighten down the wing nuts. Install the positive battery cable. Snug it down. Install the negative battery cable. Snug it down. On the radiator, I have installed a coolant funnel. We're going to fill the radiator with coolant. Let this bubble and drink the rest of the coolant. Once the radiator is full of fluid, we're going to put a little bit more in here. And then we're going to go inside of the car and start it. This will start the bleeding procedure for the coolant, and we're going to run the car until we see no more bubbles coming out of here, and the coolant level may drop again. When the coolant is fully bled inside of the vehicle, you'll be able to have the heat on, and you will have no cold pockets. It will just always be hot. At that point, go ahead and remove your coolant funnel from the car. And install your radiator cap. Install the under tray. We're going to hook it up inside of here first. Pull the inner fender liner back into place. Tuck it up under the front bumper. We'll go around and start putting clips in. One more. There's two 10mm bolts on the underside of the bumper that go in to the inner fender liner. Our bolts are broken. This one just spins inside, this one's snapped, so we will not be resecuring these. However, if you have these bolts, go ahead and attach those now. Install the wheel, get the 5 lug nuts started. Snug them down. Torque your wheels to 80 foot-pounds in a star pattern. And you're good to go.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.